Welcome to my channel. Today the question of the proposal I will discuss is how simultaneous and sequential bilinguals acquire speech sounds. To answer the question, I will replicate McCarthy et al. Study in 2014. Here's the table of contents. I will divide this proposal into 4 parts: introduction, literature, methodology and data collection, as well as results and discussion. The question of the proposal is closely related to phonetics and phonology. To answer the question, we'll first go through some background research, which are also mentioned in McCarthy et al. Study. And then I will introduce the aim of the proposal and what exactly I will adjust to replicate McCarthy et al.'s experiment to form the proposal. According to Kuhl 2004, monolingual infants become attuned to the speech sounds of their ambient language within the first year of life. Phonemic categories continue to be refined until adolescence, put forward by Hansen and Barrett in 2000. Research on the phonemic development of simultaneous bilinguals shows that they can discriminate sounds of both languages by 12 months old. There appear to be two main accounts of development. On the one hand, Sandara, Polka, and Mona study in 2008 has shown that simultaneous bilinguals can discriminate the sounds of both of the languages being learned throughout the first year of life. However, Bosch and Sebastian Malles 2003 have a thought of their initial differences in sequential bilinguals from monolinguals. Sequential bilingual children, unlike simultaneous bilinguals, often grew up in dense multicultural cities like London, and the immigrant group is the local majority of that region, claimed by Resinger in 2007, where the family language is dominant in the community. Children in these communities acquire family languages first language, and second language is acquired fully at a later stage of development. So first language influences are present during second language acquisition. Studies on sequential bilinguals differ in the amount of second language exposure that children have had, but generally it is accepted that there is some first language to second language influence, at least initially. Sequential bilingual acquisition complicated by the fact that first language phonology is still developing, and this provides a backdrop for the acquisition of the second language. Based on Hansen and Barrett 2000, sequential bilinguals differ in the perception of first language and second language until early adolescence. However, differences in their production reduces with age, mentioned by Vieman, 1996. Sequential bilinguals could acquire second language sounds to native-like level. They start to learn second language when first language categories are less well established than those of adult learners. Early and late learners have differences because of neuroplasticity. First language phonemic categories becomes more robust with age, so new second language category acquisition becomes harder, as Flage 1995 said. First language and second language phonemes exist in a common space, and first language categories are used when second language phonemes are similar to first language phonemes. So the similar second language sounds are thought to be easier to acquire. Children have less well-established first language categories, and so second language sounds are easier to acquire and can reorganize their phonological space accordingly. However, sequential bilinguals are also likely to be exposed to native, such as teachers, and non-native, like parents' varieties. Christia 2011 has an opinion that infants and children are sensitive to accented variants and are exposed to it, especially if their parents are late arrival second language learners, based on McCarthy et al. 2013. This can cause problems in close contrasts, for example, ship and sheep, which second language learners often do not have, so the contrast may not initially be acquired. In McCarthy et al. 2014, they also discussed the development of the voicing contrast, and in this research, the focus was on the acquisition of the voicing contrast of plosives. Because of this, the replicated experiment in this proposal indicated the significance of phonetics and phonology. Voice onset time, hereafter VOT, has been found as a reliable cue to distinguish between voiced and voiceless plosives in English. And Leisker and Ambronson's pioneering studies from 1964 found that in word initial positions, VOT yields three different types of plosives. The first one is where voicing begins before the release of the stop, known as leading voice, and creates a voiced unaspirated stop, shown as values below 0 milliseconds in spectrogram. Second is where voicing begins just after the release, and when the release and voicing are more or less simultaneous, known as short-leg voicing, which creates a voiceless unaspirated stop, shown as values between 0 and 30 milliseconds on spectrogram. The third one is where voice onset time, which is VOT, lags considerably behind the release, known as non-lag voicing, and creates a voiceless aspirated stop, shown on the spectrogram values over 30 milliseconds. Stevens and Clade 1974 found that, as well as varying in VOT, voiced plosives in English have a longer formant transition, which comes after voice onset, while the most natural voiceless plosives have a formant transition that appears before the voice onset, so quicker formant transition. Different plosives also have different patterns of acquisition, and Macon and Barton 1979 summarized this development into three stages. The first stage is all plosives are produced in the short-leg region, and then a distinction between voiceless and voiced plosives is made, but may not be perceived by adults. Finally, around 2 years, children can produce target voiced short-leg and voiceless long-leg plosives, but the long leg is often considerably longer than in adult production. It may be months or years before children acquire sufficient articulatory skills to consistently produce adult-like voicing. Okay, other languages that contain leading voice like French and Spanish show that this develops as late as 5 years old, if not later. Cooley-Port and Preston 1974 suggested that short-leg voicing is produced successfully first because it's a less complex articulation, while leading voice requires more muscle gestures, and long-leg voicing requires more careful control of the larynx and vocal folds. Perception also shows a developmental trend. For example, Hazen and Barrett 2000 show that older children are more accurate with their phonemic categorization than younger children. Nonetheless, children at 12 years old still don't categorize as consistently as adults, which suggests that phoneme boundary sharpening doesn't occur until well into the second decade of life. Nitrora's developmental weighting shift hypothesis 1996 suggests that this developmental trend in phonemic perception are due to the fact that children firstly pay more attention to the global resonances of the vocal tract, like formant transitions, and as time goes on, and children gain more experience in their native language, they become more aware of and utilize the additional properties in their native language that can help them in making phonemic decisions, such as vocalic duration. In McCarthy et al. 2013 study, they found that first-generation immigrants use silhouette-like voicing patterns with English plosives, which leads to foreign accented exposure for their children. Later in McCarthy et al. 2014 study, they found some overlap between English voice and silhouette voiceless plosives, which we can see the comparisons below. All of the aspects I've just discussed raise interesting questions about the phonemic development of sequential bilinguals, which form the research question for the study. First, is there evidence for the influence of existing first language categories when the children begin to acquire their second language? Second, if so, with experience, are children able to perceive and produce in a native-like way phonemic contrasts that do not exist in their first language? As a replicated experiment, I'm gonna change the participants in my research. Instead of looking at Swahili English bilinguals, I will discuss Mandarin English bilinguals. Thus, to answer the question, I'll firstly examine the length of Mandarin voiced and voiceless plosives to see if there's an overlap between English voiced and Mandarin voiceless plosives, just like in McCarthy et al. 2014 study. And then I will follow up the two experiments in McCarthy et al.'s 2014 study, the perception experiment and production experiment. Here are some adjustments I will make in my future experiment. Chinatown in New York City is where a lot of immigrants from China will live in. Therefore, instead of processing the experiment in the UK, I'm planning to collect data in New York City. The age of participants and the experiment design will stay the same as McCarthy et al. 2014 study. The hypothesis I will make for this proposal is, for production, sequential bilinguals will use Mandarin categories for English plosives, and for perception, there will be less consistent and different phonemic boundaries. And it will focus on time 1, so the first time I examine those children participants. Now I will proceed to methodology and data collection part. I will introduce the relevant factors and procedure used in the two experiments in McCarthy et al. 2014 study in detail, and then how they give me thoughts of my own proposal and future experiment. Both experiments in McCarthy et al.'s 2014 study have 55 children in total as participants. All of the children took the experiment twice. The only difference between the two experiments is those participants were tested on a separate day. 40 out of 55 are Swahili English sequential bilinguals. 25 of them are female, 15 are male. For 15 English monolinguals, 7 of them are female, 8 are male. Swahili English bilingual and English monolinguals' average age when taking the first experiment is 54.2 months and 52.7 months, respectively. All of the children who participate in the experiments have normal hearing threshold, no chronic middle ear inflections, and are not reported to have speech and language difficulties. In order to participate in time 1 of experiment 1, all participants are needed to pass 3 screening tests covering hearing, IQ, and production screen. In time 2, children are requested to do a phonology assessment screen. Children who are not able to complete or pass the tests are excluded from the analysis. Moreover, in order to reduce the deviations caused by the bilingual and monolingual participants' own language backgrounds on results, bilingual children who have more than 20% of English exposure from the main caregiver from birth to preschool counted as sequential bilinguals. Schools from the Camden and Hackney regions have less than 20% of students from Bangladesh. Thus, by having minimal contact with Haiti, English monolingual children were recruited from these schools. Considering that, the parents' education may also have an impact on children's language acquisition. 50 out of 55 families answer the democratic information question. Most of parents have GCSE education or A-level college degree. I will mention from here that in my future experiment, the participants I will collect will from New York City. I will follow up the setting that McCarthy et al. Used in their experiments. So, children will raise and grow up in New York City, their second or third immigration. from China, and they need to have minimal contact with native English speakers from New York City. And I will try to lower down the age of the children participants in time 1. A familiarization block was placed at the beginning to start the experiment 1, which includes 4 trails in total, so like 2 trails for B and 2 trails for P. All answers need to be for participants to continue to the test block. Following is the auditory labeling task, which proceeds in computer game format in a laptop in a quiet room with headphones. Participants are requested to listen to the stimuli and point to the picture of the target word. After each task, there is an on-screen bamboo to encourage participants. To track attention and maintain stable phoneme boundaries, continuum endpoints, in another word, catch trails, were randomly interspersed 20% of the time. Catch trails are correct pronunciation of tokens without VOT delay and formation increase, like which in the auditory labeling task. A corrective feedback like well done or a cross will be given after each trail. Test stimuli p, b, k, and g were presented in an adaptive procedure, starting with 2 independent randomly interleaved endpoints of the continuum. So for example, one at a clear b and another at a clear p. After is a modified Levitt 1971 procedure, where the stimuli were labeled as one word of the pair. For example, g in word goat. In order to keep the same level of performance, the percentage of appearance time for this modified procedure is 29% and 71%. Besides, depending on the participant's categorization of 2 stimuli, the next trail will move further or back forward the endpoint of the continuum. There are also word checking with parents, picture pointing, and 3 forced choice tasks in experiment 2. There are some statistical analysis methods used in McCarthy et al.'s experiments. Firstly, separate one-way ANOVAs is used to analyze will different socioeconomic groups influence the results. For the statistical analysis, they use a linear mixed model analysis, hereafter LMM, and a CDAC post hoc analysis. In experiment 1, to test for differences in perception, LMM analysis were performed for categorization slope and phoneme boundary, using the generalized LMM model in SPSS and specifying the identity link function. Language group, time, and contrast, such as bilabial versus vela, were treated as fixed factors. To account for individual differences between children, participant was treated as a random factor in all analyses. Significant interactions were explored with sequential CDAC post hoc analysis. Slope values were log transformed for statistical tests because of their skewed distribution. How LMM and sequential CDAC post hoc analysis works in experiment 2 will be discussed in the results part. This proposal is a follow-up research of McCarthy et al. 2014 study. Data and relevant factors will just be like McCarthy et al. 2014, which I just mentioned above. The questions for data collection cannot be simply answered with numbers. Therefore, the analysis I need to use in the proposal will be qualitative analysis. As I mentioned above, all the participants will be children. They need to follow the instructions of the researcher. Online experiments will probably not be a good choice. Therefore, all the experiments will proceed in person. Methods for analysis will stay the same as in McCarthy et al. 2014 by using ANOVAs, LMM, and sequential CDAC post hoc analysis. Now, let's move on to results and discussion part. Here comes to the results of experiment 1 of McCarthy et al. 2014 study. 18 children in P, B contrast and 14 children in K, G contrast are excluded from the analysis due to nonconformity to the inclusion criterion. Comparing the slope or phoneme boundary between socioeconomic statuses groups, there's no significant difference found. Focusing on categorization slope now, as we can see from the table, bilingual type 1 has shallower slopes than monolinguals for k, g contrast, but for p, b, bilinguals and monolinguals behave similarly. Both groups in type 2 have steeper slopes than in type 1, but similar slopes in between for p, b, and k, g categorization slope. In these box plots, lower the log values, shallower the slopes. Thus, in type 1, which is the white box we can see from the table, monolinguals and bilinguals are both further to the adult target, the dashed line, than in type 2. We can therefore say there is a significant increase in perceptual acuity from type 1 to 2 for the monolinguals and bilinguals. Furthermore, except in k, g slope for monolinguals, the white and gray boxes are not close to each other. Thus, significant steepness differences between type 1 and 2 can be observed here. Here's the results for phoneme boundary. Sequential CDAC post-hoc tests reveal that p, b had a significantly shorter phoneme boundary than k, g, and overall, there was no significant difference between the monolinguals and bilinguals. The monolinguals, however, displayed a significant shift in phoneme boundary from type 1 to 2 for p, b, and k, g, such that they were closer to that of the adult target. We can also see in box plots, the gray boxes are closer to the dashed line than white boxes, whereas the bilinguals showed no significant difference between type 1 and 2. McCarthy et al. 2014 compared the production of the children with the different socioeconomic groups using separate one-way ANOVAs, which showed that there were no significant differences because of socioeconomic influence. So the data could all be included in the final analysis because they didn't see that it was affected by contextual factors. The findings in the middle are put into a box plot from the acoustic analysis. So as you can see on the y-axis, the measurements are in milliseconds, and we have time 1 on the left and time 2 on the right. The white boxes are the voiceless plosives, so p or k, and the gray boxes are the voiced plosives, b or g. They used the definitions of short leg, long leg, and lead voicing from Lyska and Ambronson, which I discussed above in literature part. They said that at time 1, so type 1 is tested during their first year of English-speaking nursery. At time 1, if we look at the bilinguals, we can see that they pronounced the voiced plosives b and g with short leg or even voicing lead values. Anything under 0 millisecond, the dashed, was considered as voicing lead, and the values for this are close to 0. However, the monolinguals show a short lag as there is a small gap between 0 and the voice onset. For voiceless plosives, however, both groups used a long lag as there is a big gap between 0 and the voice onset. By time 2, so 1 year later than their first test, for voiceless plosives, both groups use a long lag when produced p and k, and a short lag for b and g. The statistical data analysis showed similar results. For the statistical analysis, they used a linear mixed model analysis, LMM, and a CDAC post-hoc analysis. The LMM analysis revealed that group and time had a significant interaction, but there also appeared to be four-way interaction between the group, the contrast, the voicing, and the time. So they all had a significant effect on production. The sequential CDAC post-hoc analysis showed that the bilinguals overall used significantly shorter voice onset time than the monolinguals at time 1 for voiced plosives, which shows that their plosives were closer to that of their first language at time 1. By time 2, there was no significant difference between the two groups in voiced plosives. For voiceless plosives, no significant difference was found at time 1 or 2. Both groups used a long lag at time 1 and 2. To sum up, the results at time 1 support the hypothesis in McCarthy et al. 2014 study. The results show that the reflection of children's sensitivity to acoustic properties in their ambient language. Exposure to Swahili or Swahili accented English would have production and perception skills that reflected this exposure to Swahili phonetics and phonology. This is inferred from the shallower categorization slopes and shorter VOT values in production. Inferring that children have less refined categories for English plosives and may be using their existing or Swahili-like phonemic categories when producing and perceiving English plosives, based on McCarthy et al. 2014. Supported by monolingual language acquisition research, early language experience is crucial in the development of speech perception skills, and that this experience shapes the acquisition and structure of underlying phonemic categories. This is mentioned by Core 2004 in his native language magnet theory. Children are thought to develop a neural commitment to their native language, so first language, such that when acquiring a second language later in life, their first language phonetic categories interfere with their production and perception of non-native target sounds, based on Liverson et al. 2003. Differences here: language interference. English voice, in contrast, was difficult because of assimilation of language 2 English categories with pre-established first language categories. First language categories used to perceive and produce second language plosives, based on Bass and Tyler 2007. Therefore, compared to the theory put forward by scholars, the results shown in McCarthy et al. 2014 support their hypothesis. As a replicated experiment of McCarthy et al. 2014 study, the results of my proposal should be similar to their study. In McCarthy et al. 2014 study, the results show similar monolingual or bilingual perception of PB continual boundaries. Swahili plosives based on McCarthy et al. 2013 are shorter VOT than English plosives. Thus, time 1 was expected to show bilinguals with shorter phoneme boundary, but they had similar to monolinguals. If this unexpected result happens in my experiment, the possible explanation may be the structure of synthetic continua could have affected results, which is unlikely, because we would have expected different behavior between monolinguals or bilinguals for adult-like Swahili categories. For example, bilinguals placing boundary at lower VOT value or categorizing all stimuli as p, based on McCarthy et al. 2014. Another possible explanation is bilinguals not yet fully developed voicing lead in first language when tested at time 1. According to Macon and Barton, 1979, the development of voicing lead has been shown to take longer than short and long tag distinction, and stimuli within voicing lead region of VOT continuum is less accurately discriminated than stimuli in short lag range, according to Esling and Pisening, 1980. McCarthy et al. 2014 suggested that the unexpected results may also be children were not caught early enough in their development. The children in their experiment have already been in nursery for 7 months before study. Therefore, in my experiment, I will test younger children who get into the nursery in an earlier age. At time 2, the results of bilinguals indicate there is a significant increase in steepness of categorization slope for k, g, and p, b, which means there's more consistent labeling of continuum and more refined phonemic categories. Production of bilinguals shows longer VOT for voiced plosives than monolingual peers. Except for that, bilinguals are no longer significantly different from monolinguals. What's more, all productions for monolinguals and bilinguals fell into correct phoneme boundary for bilabial and velar categorization at time 1 and 2, but monolinguals showed a significant shift at time 1 and 2 in phoneme boundary, but this did not happen for bilinguals. The possibility may be bilingual phonemic category organization different to that of monolinguals, most likely because of phonemic categories in both languages, mentioned by Curtin, Byers, Heinlein, and Furker, 2011. Bilinguals have large variability in boundary values, which may be related to variability in speech input, claimed by McCarthy et al. 2013. In Chia, 2011's opinion, shorter phoneme boundaries is equal to more exposure to Swahili or Swahili accented input. At time 1, McCarthy et al. 2014 found bilingual children At time 1, McCarthy et al. 2014 found bilingual children may have been using first language categories in production and perception of English vowels. Time 2 results show they were able to establish second language categories that matched those of native speakers. The bilinguals needed more than just school and minimal home exposure to do this. They also needed accumulation of English experience from full-time education with no Swahili support between time 1 and 2. All children display increase in steepness of categorization slopes from time 1 to 2. The trend for development happens to both monolinguals and bilinguals. Language specification continues past first year of life, facilitated by linguistic experience based on attunement theory put forward by Essling and Pisning, 1980. Type 1. Monolinguals and bilinguals had similar categorization slopes for p, b, k, g continuum would have been expected to have steeper categorization slopes at type 1 because acquisition of bilabials precedes velar, mentioned by Fabiano Smith and Goldstein, 2010. Pattern due to increasing number of similar sounding lexical items and distinguishing between items in the lexicon. Neutra 1996 found that children have more tokens to distinguish between. This might be specific to children. For children, there are more words with g or k than p or b. Children have more refined categories for velar plosives. The inspections of children's token in Cobra by McWhinney, 2000, supports this opinion. More tokens of velar than bilabial plosives. Velar plosives are more advanced as a category for monolingual British English children. Pattern due to phonemic environment. Differences in following vowel between the two contrasts may affect acoustic salience of form and transitions if children are more sensitive to form and transitions based on Natura 1996. Natura 1996 also suggested that children are sensitive to form and transitions, like in P, B, high front vowel with high F2 and high frequency at onset or F2 and F3, which is form and transition acoustically less salient. Natura 1996 suggestion is supported by studies of adult speech perception. Blomstein and Stevens, 1979, claimed in the study that bilabial and velar plosives are misclassified in context of high front vowels. At time 2, children have improvement in categorization due to more linguistic experience. They attend to acoustic properties that do not involve spectral change, such as VOT. Differences in performance of monolingual or bilingual children, but development of perception and production in English plosives in bilinguals follows similar trajectory to that of monolinguals. More refinement of perceptual categorization is more refinement of English voicing patterns in production. Based on Bradlow et al., 1997, perception accuracy is correlated with production accuracy. Bilinguals have more refined representations, which means they produce more native English-like plosives. In McCarthy et al. 2014 study, they mentioned that language experience facilitates the development of phonemic categorization for both monolingual and sequential bilingual children, and children are initially sensitive to ambient speech input, but with language experience are able to acquire new phonemic categories. Here's the pros and cons of McCarthy et al. 2014 study. Some of the limitations listed in here may also apply in my future experiment and cause bias to my proposal. Therefore, I think it is worthy to indicate them here. The advantages of the article is they took children into consideration, which is very ethical. They did some experiments in a game format to cause children's curiosity. Moreover, the experiments are not done within one day. It delivered on separate days, which may not cause anxiety or depression to children. However, working with children may also be problematic due to their limited understanding to the task. Data missed in the study because some children cannot understand the questions. Although there are thorough preliminary analysis and pre-experiment analysis, the way McCarthy et al. Did the experiments, for example using technology like laptop, may lead to lack of focus of children. What's more, McCarthy et al. Study may also be problematic because they just focus on the PB code-gold contrasts, which may lead the findings to be specific to Swahili English speakers. In my own project, I will try to work on these two parts. Firstly, to establish different phonemic contrasts to see what will happen if these findings are universal across contrasts and across sequential bilinguals acquiring other languages. Furthermore, to investigate development of production and perception in both first language and second language to understand how sequential bilinguals organize phonemic categories. Here's the structure I will use in my own project, and there are the references I use for these proposals. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Bye bye.